out in Zoom land. Again, you can watch us tonight on Zoom. You can also watch us on simulcast on YouTube channel that's run by the Stambaugh Auditorium. And I see it's 6 o'clock. Are we ready to go? Right. It's more formal than a normal Zoom, right? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Community Matters. I'm Mahoning Matters editor Mark Sweetwood, and I'm coming to you tonight, once again, live from the beautiful Stambaugh Auditorium. Due to the pandemic, we'd love to have everyone join us. We're not really doing it this time, although we're going to try it for a hybrid event for our October 21st show. I want to thank our partners tonight, Joanne Stock, who's Chief Development Officer for Stambaugh Auditorium, and Jeff Herman, who's the CEO of Youngstown Publishing Company, the folks who publish the Business Journal. And I want to thank you for joining us on Zoom, on YouTube, and wherever you are. We hope you're comfortable tonight. If you have a question, you'll find some navigation at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to give us a question. We received a bunch from folks as we lead into tonight. We're pretty excited about that. But throughout the conversation, if you see something, you have a question, just let it know. They'll relay it to me. Tonight's conversation is part of the Mahoning Matters ongoing commitment to bring together people to talk about issues that are most important in the Valley. And we thank you for supporting the quality journalism that is, Mahoning Matters. When we were putting this event together, it became clear that November's election is more than just the usual, electoral drama that comes every 4 years with a presidential election. In August, Mahoning Matters surveyed our audience. We received more than 150 responses. We found out that 100% of folks said they were registered to vote in November, which is pretty outstanding. It shows our audience is kind of plugged in right now. 87% of those people took time to vote in the spring primary. If you remember, it was split between March and April. And 47% plan to vote by absentee ballot. 40% said they plan to vote in person. And 19% were still unsure. And that was August. And I think we're still kind of struggling with some of the pandemic issues. And we still have a lot of uncertainties. And hopefully tonight we answer some of those questions for that 19%. So while there's many questions out there about ballot issues, which we'll kind of address October 21st, we right now want to engage everyone on the whole process of voting. So we're turning to an amazing group. We have a great panel tonight. Our guests are Dr. Paul Sracic. He's the YSU professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations. Tom McCabe, Deputy Director of the Mahoning County Board of Elections, is here tonight. Kristen Olmi is President of the League of Women Voters of Greater Youngstown. And of course, with us as always, my good friend Bryant Youngblood, Assistant Director for the Academy of Urban Scholars in Youngstown. We're wonderful. We're so glad to have Bryant back with us again. I thought we'd begin for a few minutes here talking with Dr. Sracic. He's a renowned not renowned, he's very well-known expert in politics in the Valley. He's seen a lot. And I thought I'd begin tonight by asking him, are there any corollaries right now with this election we're looking at, especially on the national level, where there are so many polar opposite expectations for what people sort of expected as an outcome? What does history tell us about that?
Well, I mean, we've had divisions, harsh divisions, many times before in our history. We've had disputed elections many times in our history, and we've survived them. Some of them were likely worse than anything we're looking at in 2020. And it's not just, people point to the Civil War, right, when we lost, 600,000 Americans at each other's hands. We're not looking at that. But even, our early elections, the election of 1800, where we had an electoral tie, and it went to the House of Representatives, and it took 36 ballots. And the state of Virginia basically said they were going to leave the Union if Thomas Jefferson was not named president, right? And that's very early on in our history and caused us to amend the Constitution. 1876, we had an election where there were 4 states that we weren't sure which electors to count, that they sent 2 slates of electors. One for Rutherford B. Hayes, the governor of Ohio, who was running on the Republican side, and the other side was Samuel Tilden from New York. And ultimately, Congress formed a panel, of 15-member panel with 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats from Congress, and then 5 members of the Supreme Court, thinking that they would be neutral. And there were 2 Republican appointees, 2 Democratic appointees, and one, I'm not sure who he was appointed by, but he was considered neutral, David Davies from Illinois, and he was kind of be the deciding vote. The Democrats in Illinois got a little fancy and decided this was the time we didn't elect senators. They appointed him to the United States Senate to try to curry favor with him. Instead, he said, well, now I'm a senator, I can't vote on this anymore. He withdrew. The next up in line in seniority was a Republican. Republicans dominated the panel by 1 vote, 8-7, and lo and behold, every Republican elector was counted. And that's how Hayes gets elected president. So, you know, we've had these things before, and we survived.
Have we had a time where part of the national narrative right now seems to be about, you know, whether or not we can trust the voting, you know, whether mail-in ballots, and we're going to spend some time with our experts tonight talking about that. But has there been a time where the actual process has been sort of the focus of so much back and forth between the two sides?
I don't recall, but, you know, keep in mind that things were much less formal as to how we voted, you know, early in our history. You know, it used to be, for example, that newspapers were partisan. I mean, maybe we're going back to that, right? But, you know, the idea that we didn't have a neutral press. They were basically run by the political parties. Right. And the political parties would essentially put the names of the candidates in an ad, and you would tear that out and go in and hand that in. And that's how you voted, right? So, you know, we work very, you know, professional. The way ballots, you know, you used to be, you kind of, you know, didn't have a choice. You picked a Democratic ballot or Republican ballot right down the line, so you couldn't pick and choose in between. But I don't recall in the past ever sort of the focus. I mean, maybe 2000, obviously, you know, we had the contested election down in Florida, and you know, we looked at the ballot. You know, one of the interesting things in the United States, and whenever I do a lot of foreign lectures, and what amazes foreign audiences is the fact that we don't have one set of rules for our elections. Right. Right. We have 51 set of rules. And, you know, people think of us as the United States. And I point out to them that means united separate things. And, you know, that's sort of how we act in terms of elections. So, you know, you can have the right to vote in one state and not in another state. That amazes people.
And on that subject, you brought up something earlier we were talking about this, about the naked ballots issue in Pennsylvania, where the state Supreme Court last week said, look, your ballot comes to you in the mail. You're supposed to put it inside a special envelope and then put that envelope inside the other envelope you mail to your ballots. And if you don't use that middle envelope, then you know, those ballots would be thrown out. So that's what across the borders, you know, 10 miles away. That's an issue on voting, and we'll talk to Tom about how Ohio looks at that as well.
Right, and we've got these kind of rules in all the states that sometimes, you know, we end up losing votes that, you know, one would think were legitimate, but people made a mistake. It's the same thing even for getting on the ballot. Right, if you don't get the right signatures, right? The Board of Elections checks that out, and people don't end up going on. You know, we have these sort of complex election rules by states. Most of the time in our history, we've paid no attention to them. You know, the butterfly ballot that was famous down in 2000, where you punched holes, you know, through the ballot to vote.
And the images of them holding them up to the lights.
Right, and we had those for years. In fact, I believe they used it in Trumbull County. You know, for a long time. And nobody thought about it until we had an election that was divided by less than 600 votes. And then suddenly, you know, it became really, really significant. And we're all staring at the screen at CNN, you know, with the guy with the magnifying glass trying to figure out whether the hole was poked through the piece of paper. You know, and think about the Iowa caucuses this year. We were unsure, you know, who the winner was with that, trying to sort of figure out, just recording this. I was actually in Japan at the time. On a TV show, covering the elections for them. And I'll be honest with you, it was kind of embarrassing that we couldn't run a simple caucus and figure out who the winner was, you know, that night. You know, it's when it's close that it becomes a problem. If this election is close, we're going to be looking at every board of elections around the country, trying to figure out what we counted and what we didn't.
Well, you certainly started out tonight's program with lots for us to talk about. And I think we need to bring in the other panelists a little bit later and go over things like like what happens in Ohio with the naked ballots. So I appreciate that, Dr. Sracic. I want to bring in Bryant Youngblood real quickly. Just Bryant, you are the youngest panelist tonight, so congratulations. You, I don't want you win for that, but we're glad you're with us. One of the things that strikes me is, what are you hearing from people closer to your age about the interest in voting? What issues, not so much about what they're going to vote for, but about the issues of getting to the polls and getting registered? What are some of the things you're hearing?
First, I say thank you. I am the youngest person in the room, but it's great to be around so many more mature and knowledgeable people on the call, right? But to be honest, I think you guys hit it on the head a little bit when you spoke on trust. I think a lot of people, around my age group, they are really struggling to, just trust the overall system when it comes to voting. However, on the opposite side of things, I do see a group of young people that are also motivated to vote and to practice, their voting rights and make sure that other people know how important it is. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. A lot of people don't really understand the Electoral College. So they're like, well, why should I vote when the popular vote doesn't really matter? But we can talk about that a little further later on. But I know that's another issue, just that doubt or that trust of the actual system. Then, there's the things that come into play with, IDs and all the requirements that are necessary for you to be able to vote.
Right.
Some people feel like they're actually there to limit or prohibit people from getting out to vote and making their voices heard too. So, and really with the tension and the temperature of the country right now, it's a lot of distrust that I think that's the common tone that I've been feeling lately.
Do you get a sense that people are motivated to vote, or to at least make sure they're registered to vote now?
What I do see, I've been seeing so many different pop-ups being held throughout the Valley, which is exciting. We just actually held one here. So we're just I see people trying and making a huge attempt to make sure that everyone is registered to vote. Even people that are out there that may think that they're registered, there is still a such thing as a purge, you know what I mean? And some people, their registration is no longer intact. So they would have to re-register and take care of those things too. So I do see people trying to educate the community on the importance of voting and how to make sure that you're registered.
And that's really, you mentioned the event earlier this week that Kristen and the folks from the League of Women Voters are part of too. I mean, just getting that sort of connectivity in the community. One thing quickly, I got a reader question. I'm going to drop it on you first. And the person, and I'm presuming from the question it's a younger person, so I'll let you run this one. I can't think of one good reason to vote. Nothing ever changes around here. Can your panel give me one good reason? Well, I'm going to let you take a shot at what's one good reason why people should vote.
I think they should look around. They should look at the current state of the city and the things that the city is lacking. And a lot of us think about voting on a national scale, but some of the most important votes are held locally, because those are the ones that are going to directly influence and impact us. So if you truly want to see things start to change and see some things happening directly in your home, in your neighborhoods and your environments, then pay just as much attention to your local votes as you do to your national votes.
Well said, boy. We should make a clip out of that and play that, because because it's an issue though. I mean, you hear this a lot. A lot of people who say, well, nothing ever changes for me. I don't know why I should go out there. But that's it's because you have to decide what change is it that you want to see and even be a part of. So that's great. Thank you, Bryant. We'll get back to you. I definitely want to bring up Tom McCabe, who's Deputy Director of the Mahoning County Board of Election, and Kristen Olmi, who's President of the League of Women Voters right now, because you guys are right now the front lines. I mean, Tom, how many requests so far for absentee votes have you received in Mahoning County?
Well, right now we have about 34,200 on the computer.
Wow.
And probably another 6,000 left to put on. And of course, every day, mail comes about 10 in the morning. There's 2 to 3 trays every day. And in comparison, in 2016, we voted close to 30,000 people absentee through that process of the mail.
Total.
And to sit at 34,000 right now, wow, we're well above what we were 4 years ago.
That is, but it shows that there's some interest in voting, which is great. But it also shows that a lot of people aren't sure they want to show up, right? And so that brings us to one of the questions we had early on. How will election officials ensure that everyone has access to a ballot or a polling place in the Valley? What's the process for that?
Well, you know, Mark, I don't think you're going to see much difference in what voters have seen in the past. The biggest difference is going to be in-person voting and the precautions we have to take with the COVID and some of the social distancing and what our poll workers have to do. But overall, voters aren't going to see a big difference from what they saw in 18 or 16 or even 12. It's the same process. It's easy to do. And I think most local boards of elections are prepared to handle election day at this point on November 3rd.
What did you learn in the spring that you're sort of applying to the world this time around?
Well, Mark, we never had an election in the spring in person. And so there wasn't a lot of lessons learned going forward to November because we were never given that opportunity to have an election on March 17th or in April. It was all by mail.
Right.
But we have adjusted some of our staffing and equipment to handle the volume that we're expecting and we are getting to make sure those absentee ballots are processed and counted in an accurate way and an efficient way that we have results at 7:30 on election night for the voters.
Do you remember how many absentee ballots did you go through in the spring? How many? What was the total count? Do you remember?
No, I don't know the total, but I believe we're in the about 24-25% of total voters participated in the spring. And in this type of election, a presidential, we're talking probably mid-70s to high 70s potentially. And so participation really fell in the spring because we had no in-person voting.
Right.
And number two, the party ballots or party primaries, some of those races were basically over by the time we got to vote in Ohio.
Kristen, right now I think the league is out doing a lot of voter information, voter registration programs. What are the key dates that people need to know about right now? If I'm looking to vote, what are the key dates that I should be plugging in right now so that I can make sure that my vote counts?
So what we have is October 5th is the deadline for voter registration, right? So everything that we've been doing as the league in partnership with places like with Bryant at Academy of Urban Scholars, and then all our other coalition partners and locations and sites, right now it's, updating, making sure your registration is up to date. Are you registered? Voter registration. And then, of course, October 6th, the absentee and in-person voting begins. So you could send those in. So really pushing the absentee ballot requests that, we're pushing, obviously, whether it's the forms provided by Mahoning County Board of Elections or the form that Secretary LaRose sent out. We obviously are getting people to fill those out as they receive them. And then October 31st is the absentee ballot request deadline at noon. So, we really are trying to work and I have to give credit where credit's due. The Mahoning County Board of Elections is wonderful with working with us, getting us what we need, whether that's been through Tom or Joyce Calpesta. Either way, we seem to be getting those registration forms or anything that we need and doing a pretty good job. Never any resistance or any difficulty working with the Board of Elections here. And I think that needs to be said because the league, we're a nonpartisan organization and the board approaches everything in a nonpartisan manner. And we always enjoy that partnership. So we're really pushing to make sure those the ballot requests are, if you want to vote absentee and you're not going to vote in person, either early or on election day, then we need to have those requests in. We're using as much resources and volunteers. And I have 2 or 3 women with the League of Women Voters who have stepped up and gone above and beyond, and they're doing everything they can to get materials to all our coalition partners, whether that's, the Dorothy Day House or MyCap or Rodolph Shalom, anybody that we could deliver resources to, we are. So we have, as much of a diverse coalition registering voters and doing the absentee request as possible. And then, of course, November 2nd, that's the postmark deadline for absentee ballots. And that is critical. That is a critical date that we're discussing because people think, in the state of Ohio, you cannot mail your ballot on election day. It's got to be postmarked that November 2nd. And then November 3rd, which is election day, polls open at 6:30 a.m. Like Tom said, most of that process on election day is going to remain the same. We just want to make sure that I've been calling them the key five, the top five. Those are the 5 most important dates that you can have in your calendar. October 5th, registration deadline. 6th, absentee and in-person voting starts. October 31st, Halloween. You better have your ballot request deadline in. And then
Trick or
November
treat.
2nd is our postmark date. And the 3rd, of course, is election day. So we're just trying to make sure those 5 dates are very much in everybody's mindset.
Real quickly, one of our questions from a reader was, how can people register? What do I need to register to vote?
Well, Mark, in Ohio, it's pretty easy. You can come to the Board of Elections, you can go to the post office, the BMV, and almost any government agency now you can register to vote. But you can also do it online in Ohio. And it's pretty simple just by visiting our local website, Mahoning County Board of Elections, or the Secretary of State's website, and register right online. And
do I physically need documents? Do I need documents to prove who I am? Or?
No, we're gonna need your name, your birth date, where you live at, and it's a really simple process. And for someone not to be registered in this day and age, you really almost have to make an effort not to be registered because it's pretty simple to register in Ohio.
Kristen, are there key events that we should let people know? You've had a couple of big ones. You mentioned them so far just in the past week, but are there upcoming large events that people need to be aware of?
Well, yesterday was National Voter Registration Day, so we had a lot of things going on yesterday. And moving forward, honestly, the best thing is as we continue to add a couple of these last-minute voter registration drive-through events, the best thing to do is to honestly check out the leagueofwomenvoters.com.
There you go.
Or our Facebook. Because we're really looking at a couple closing big events and the closeout here to the deadline, the October 5th deadline. And we're trying to add events. We're always open to, coalition partners or anybody saying, hey, let's do a big voter registration drive. And of course, in conjunction, both political parties do a lot of voter registration activities. We just don't participate in those because, again, we're nonpartisan. We're a separate 501c4 entity. So, but the best thing to do is to check out our Facebook page or our website, and that always gives you a calendar of what's going on and when there's additional registration events. And we did a lot of door knocking registration. One of the things that I think is important for people to know is we took the purge list or the tentative purge list,
right,
and we went out and knocked on doors and said to folks, hey, are you aware that you might need to re-register? We had a wonderful group that worked on that throughout 2019, and we actually hit between 500 and 700 households and got folks re-registered and made sure their change of address was added. So we feel pretty good in our continued outreach efforts, but we've partnered been on YSU's campus. So we're hoping that, we've reached a lot of ground and look forward to hopefully having a couple more big events in the next couple weeks that we'll make sure everybody knows.
And please let Mahoning Matters know, which I know you will.
Absolutely.
Everyone's done a really good job. I mean, the press releases are coming in and we're just trying to get them out there as quickly as we can. Back to you, Tom. We're getting some questions about early voting. Can you explain? Kristen gave us the overview of the 5 dates. Explain early vote. How can people early vote if they choose to either do it in person or even drop off their absentee ballot?
Yeah, when we talk early vote in Ohio, I guess there's 2 different ways. It's your absentee system, which we're
right,
going to mail you a ballot once we get an application from you. Of course, when we say early vote, that's the in-person voting.
Right.
That starts on October 6th. It'll start right here at the Board of Elections at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it goes until 5 o'clock every night. Now, your last 2 weeks of election, it's 8 to 7, Monday through Friday, and we'll be open the last 2 weekends before election. On Saturday, I believe it's 8 to 4 both Saturdays and 1 to 5 on Sundays.
And that's the same.
That want to vote weekends.
Is that set by the state? Does that happen at if I'm in Trumbull County, if I'm in Columbiana County, the hours are the same?
That's correct. It's standard across the state, and that happened about 8 to 10 years ago to put uniformity into the elections. And I tell you, a lot of people take advantage of that early vote. It's easy, it's accessible. If you're out and about on the weekend, those last 2 weekends, it's easy to get to. And just like voting on a regular election day. So you need to bring an ID, some form of identification to vote, but it's simple and easy. So voters can take part in that in person if they want to. They don't have to wait till election day. But also what Kristen said, the absentee vote too. You have until October 31st to request an application. But now we're telling people don't wait that long, because if you're waiting until Saturday before election and you expect us to process that, get a ballot in the mail on a Saturday and get that to you and have that vote count, that's tough. So if you want to vote absent,
and a post office change.
Get it early.
Sure, I was going to suggest in a post office change a couple years ago, all of the mail, even if it's if I'm down the block from your offices and I mail in the ballot, it has to go through Cleveland, so that's added.
Still goes through.
Yeah.
And our ballots come out of Cleveland. We have a vendor, a third-party vendor, that our ballots come out of Cleveland. So if you wait till that Saturday, Friday, even Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you're taking the risk that that vote won't count. We're saying take advantage of it early. You can start now. People start submitting those over the summer. And something to note, that a lot of people have submitted these applications already. You know, we have, like I said, 33,000 on the system already. Those ballots don't go out until October 6th.
Wow.
So a lot of the calls that we're getting, Mark, are those people that turned an application in 5 to 6 weeks ago. But to note, we can't start voting people across the state until October 6th. And so that's why there's been this delay of people submitting an application but not getting their ballot yet.
Yeah, that's a couple of the questions we received in advance was, hey, I mailed this in, and when can I expect it? So that's a good date to keep in mind too. A reader or a member of the audience has asked us to ask you guys, can I drop off my absentee ballot in person, and what's the process for that?
Mark, you can. Once you receive in the mail, you have two options: either putting it back in the mail with the return postage, which the state's not going to pay for this year, so the voter is required to put a stamp on that, or you can drop it off here at the Board of Elections all the way through 7:30 on election night, November 3rd. There is a drop box, and it's going to be pretty accessible right in our front parking lot, that they can just drive up, drop the ballot in, and drive away, or you can walk it right into the board if you feel safer that way.
Wow, good, okay. And just one box in the county?
Just one box per park. Now, you cannot take your ballot on election day to your polling location. They can't accept them at the location. So if you have a voter, they can't go down the street and drop it off their church or their school or community center. It has to be returned to the Board of Elections.
Can we ask you about
one box?
Can we ask you, Tom, about naked ballots? So you have your absentee ballot. You have to put that into a blank envelope, and then you put that envelope into the official envelope to drop off or mail to the Board of Elections. If I don't use the middle envelope, the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania last week ruled that those will be discounted. What's the rule in Ohio?
Same thing, but Pennsylvania uses a different system with their envelopes. In Ohio, it's pretty difficult to return a ballot to us without that identification. That's your name, your ID. With an absentee, we have to have the last 4 digits of your social security number, your driver's license number to verify that, as well as signature verification. And so every election, we have a small percentage of people who drop them off without that identification envelope.
Gotcha.
It's kind of tough to do. We don't have that naked ballot issue in Ohio that Pennsylvania has.
But you have to use both envelopes.
Yeah, you have to have that identification envelope, and then the inner envelope, which protects the privacy of your ballots.
Right.
And so when we open those envelopes, at that point, your ballot has no name to it and no identification to it. And that's part of the system, that your vote is secret, it's private, it's your vote.
This is only since we're sort of delving into the safety of voting. One of the readers said, they want some assurance. They said, since the Board of Elections here is run by Democrats and everyone always votes Democrat, Tom, how can you assure them that the process will be on the up and up this year?
Well, boards of elections in Ohio are split along party lines. And so Joyce Kilpesta is our director. She's a Democrat. She's also the Democrat chair. Of course, the deputy director is the opposite party. That's myself, and I'm the Republican Party chair. And then our full-time employees, 12 of them are 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. We're also going to hire 850 people at the polls. And of that 850, there'll be 425 Republicans, there's going to be 425 Democrats. And so Ohio ensures that there has to be members of both parties present whenever ballots are processed or handled. Anything that's done, there's always 2 parties present. And so I guess it's designed that I keep an eye on Joyce and Joyce keeps an eye on me, and we keep an eye on the employees and they keep an eye on everyone else. So Ohio has a good bipartisan system in their boards of elections across the state.
Is that similar to other states? Because there has been this national narrative about, how safe and how, if it's a Republican governor or Democrat governor, who's minding the store. The way boards of election run, because you really do the work, it's pretty bipartisan system, is it not?
It really is, and that's in Ohio. Now, each state, and I think Dr. Sracic touched on that earlier, all 50 states have a different way of running elections and how they handle elections. And I know some states like Florida, it's a 2-1 split. I think maybe Dr. Sracic can answer that, but based on the governor or the secretary of state, there's 2 Ds and 1 R or 2 Rs and 1 D. And so it's not an even split in some states. In Ohio, it is. So for your Ohio voters, I can assure you that we're all watching each other.
and really the way a normal election day runs, you have, as you say, maybe 4 years ago, you have 20 or 30,000 absentee ballots. The vast majority of people are showing up on election day casting votes, and there's a systematic sort of, everyone knows their job. I've watched a lot of elections in Mahoning County. I generally criticize you in the past for being the last of our 3 counties sometimes who get us the information. But the reality is that it's a systematic process. There's not a lot of chance for bad things to happen because A, there's a lot of people working on it. B, everyone has their job. The way ballots move through the system is pretty systematic.
Sure, but I have to correct you. I think over the last 4 years, we beat Trumbull County every single year. And in the last governor's race, we were the first large county out of the office.
All right.
So I have to say we were, right, yeah. We have a little competition how quick we do this, but it's about accuracy and not how fast.
And we want you to be accurate. It's just you got a bunch of media people who are looking at the clock, and that's we're going to
right.
Well, I think this year we're going to be looking at a calendar, probably not the clock, but we'll get into that in a few minutes because
there's potential there.
I think it's going to be a little bit different. I mean, and I want to bring everybody back in. A lot of questions we've been receiving have been about the process and what can people expect. We've touched on this a little bit, but Election Day is going to be, socially distant. One reader has asked us, how can I be assured that the materials will be disinfected between every voters? Can you give us kind of a run through just between socially distant people and what the setup, how it will look, in-person voting look a little bit differently this year?
Well, it's going to look a lot different because we're going to have plastic barriers between our workers and the voters. The voters are going to be 6 feet apart. We're going to have one worker at every location just cleaning the equipment, the voting booths. Every voter is going to get their own pen that once they vote, they take it with them. And I think that's an important step, that they're not touching the same pen voter to voter. And so what they're going to see difference is a little more spacing, a little more protection with the plastic in between our voters and our poll workers. Just one worker is just cleaning. There's going to be masks available, sanitizers available. The state's done a great job with that. So outside that, it's going to look the same. It's just going to look different the era of COVID.
Will there be like marked off on the floors? You must stand here in line, and sort of what you see in some major stores right now in terms of checkout and all that.
Sure, Joyce is ordering all the floor 6 feet stickers, and again, I think we're pretty well prepared. But it's going to be no different. You come into your polling location, 5-10 minutes. It's no different than going to the grocery store, the gas station, anything else that you're doing on a regular basis out there. Is just to live your life at this point. Voting's going to be no different. We have to take those precautions, though. And
the other thing that's probably working a little bit in your favor at the polls is if there is a grand influx of people voting, by mail in advance of this, there will be necessarily fewer people at the polls. So if there is a little different congestion, that should lessen the impact, or is my math grossly incorrect?
No, you're exactly right. Instead of having 120,000 people coming out on election day, we'll probably have about 55 to 60,000 come out. And that's not a bad election. That's a pretty, that's a governor's election, basically, that we can handle that. And usually you don't get those lines in off-year elections. It's those presidential elections when you get those huge influx of voters that you see the lines forming. There are going to be lines because of the 6-foot distance,
right?
But it should go pretty fast.
Any idea? Are you forecasting what sort of turnout you're expecting this year?
Well, we haven't done that yet. Usually we wait until the early voting starts and all the absentees are in, but we're projecting probably 75 to 76% turnout.
Wow.
Probably a little better than 4 years ago when the turnout was actually down. But as we get closer, we make our projections, and usually we're pretty close within a percentage or two.
Dr. Sracic, is there an historical, what is 75 to 76% voter turnout? How does that stack up with voting turnout in the Valley in the past?
Well, Tom's using sort of a different measure than most political scientists use, because he's doing registered voters, I think, right?
Correct.
And we generally talk about voter eligible population. So nationally, what we saw, particularly in 2018, was really a huge national turnout, right? Above 50% voting eligible population, which for an off year, for a midterm election, is huge, because you generally get a bump of about 10% more for a presidential election. So we set a record, I think, in 2018, or the highest since 1914,
wow,
for turnout in the midterm. If we're going to follow it up in the general, that means we're looking at above 60%. Maybe as high as I think the record was 66%. Of voting eligible population. That's the highest we've ever had in our modern history, at least.
So the highest we've ever had is 2/3 of the people showed up.
Voting eligible population.
Right.
So some of those aren't registered, right? So so that would be higher if we were looking at just the registered voters. It would be above 70%. But you're right. We have a third of the voter of people who could vote, who for whatever reason don't vote. And even if we had an outstanding turnout, that would still be the result. Keep that in mind, by the way, when you see polls, right? Because you got to know what 2/3 are going to show up, right? When you're modeling your polling, and that's the art, and that's why you see a lot of divergence, I think, in political polling, because you can't always be sure who's actually going to show up.
Which brings up another good point, and anyone can jump in on this one. Readers want to know, will there be enough poll workers? You sort of the early narrative of this was that a lot of poll workers are older Americans, and in a pandemic, do we want them in the polls? I know the state sort of has changed the rules on that, Tom. So what does the poll worker situation look like?
Well, early on in the process, we were concerned. We were required to send a form out to all our former poll workers over the last 2 years to see what kind of response we were going to get, and only about 2/3 responded positive that they would come back and work. But we've had great recruiting. We're actually in the surplus right now, so we're training reserves. Our training started 2 weeks ago. Everyone's showing up for training so far. In most elections, when we get to election day, We have call-offs over the weekend. We have call-offs on Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
And we don't have those reserves. That we're scrambling to fill those precincts. And sometimes we don't have enough workers in the precincts. We run with 3 instead of 4. Mark, this time we have close to 500-600 reserves already.
Wow.
A lot of people are stepping up. I think there's community agencies and organizations out there pushing people to poll work. The attorneys are coming out to be poll workers. We're getting a great response, and we're seeing that across Ohio, where we're expecting come election morning, if someone calls off, we have a whole list of people in reserve that are already trained to come out. So what was a concern in June isn't a concern right now.
Well, that is amazing. Can I ask what the process was of finding these people? Because it really is hard, especially in a pandemic, to get anyone to go out and do anything, extra, let alone different. What was the process?
Well, I think the Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, has done a great job of getting the word out there with public service announcements.
Wow.
Our local media has done a great job. I think you guys did a story about poll workers. So I think what we were looking at is almost going to be a major issue come November.
Oh, yeah.
I think people are stepping up and taking part because they see the need for it, and people are engaged. And so we have poll workers coming because they want to make sure the process is fair from either one side or the other. We're getting them from all over the place, and it's been great because this is my 6th presidential election here. And by far, this has been the easiest so far when it comes to poll workers in the middle of a pandemic.
And for our audience,
question, Mr. Mark.
Yeah, go ahead, Bryant.
I was going to ask Mr. McCabe, what's the process in the choice of polling locations? Because I know, in the past I've seen, polling locations switch, and a lot of people weren't aware of the change, so they may go to their prior polling location and they'll find out it actually it's going or it's located somewhere else. So how does that process usually work, and what determines why a change does happen?
Well, usually at this point, when we do make a change, it means the location no longer wants us. If it's a government building, we actually have final say there that we can go into any government building and use that building. But when it comes to churches, banquet facilities, VFWs, we're at their mercy every year. We sign a 1 to 2 year contract with them. And so when they ask us to leave, that kind of prompts that change within the polling location. But what we've done over the last 10 years is we've gotten out of every school too, though. When I first started here in '99, probably a third of our locations were in schools, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. I think we only have one left, Cheney High School. And that's the only school we have left in the county. But I think I know what you're talking about. It's that it's a change when we've got to, sometimes we're forced to make that change. Mm-hmm. And what we do at that point, every voter in that location will get a postcard twice from us. Once when we first make the change, and then usually a week or 2 out from election, they get a second postcard from the Board of Elections letting them know where that change was where they're going to. We try to do very few changes in presidential elections. We try to do most of our changes in off-year elections when we have 20 to 30% turnout. That way we can notify those voters in 2021 and then again in 2022. And so you aren't going to see many changes across the county this year in polling locations. What we saw last November, you should see this November for the most part. That answers the question.
It's a good question.
It does. So the changes usually happen during the local elections?
That's what we try to do, but sometimes we don't have that ability. In the primary, we were told a couple weeks out, get rid of all your nursing homes and all your senior centers.
Oh, yeah.
And we were forced a week or two to drop all those and change them into, like in Beaver Township, we had to leave Shepherdville Valley and go to the Holiday Inn. And so to notify those voters, we try to get the postcards, we try to put something on the door of the polling location, the old polling location that morning to let the voters know it has been moved. Mm-hmm. But it's not a perfect system. We still get those calls election morning, where do I vote at?
Yeah.
But usually those voters are the ones that haven't voted in 3 or 4 years. And it's like, well, I voted here in 16, why don't I vote here in 2020? It's like, well, in those 4 years, we've moved 3 times already. ADA compliance is a big thing with us, those locations all have to be compliant under ADA. And again, they have to want us there. And get a new priest, a new minister, a new pastor, and they kick us out.
Well, in
Thank
Boardman,
you.
a couple years ago, you moved mine from the church on Glenwood down to the township offices, and that really disrupted my day because I couldn't buy the cookies after I voted because the nice church members always had cookies for sale on your way out of voting, and you moved it, and there's no cookies
Right.
at the trustee offices. So we had someone joined us late and had a question about election day. Is there going to be PPE available for voters or just for the workers?
For both,
Mass.
actually. Joyce has been stockpiling this since March.
Wow.
And she's really good at stuff like that. And so she has boxes. We have a warehouse full of sanitizers, of wipes. Again, everyone's getting their own pen. I think we have plenty. We have masks for every voter that needs a mask. The Secretary of State has supplied a lot of this to the local boards of elections. So no one's going to go without a mask or hand sanitizer when it comes to voters or poll workers.
Another reader came in and said, if you request an absentee ballot and you change your mind, can you vote in person? Earlier, I think I shared a question we had from a reader saying, can I vote by absentee and then show up at the polls to check to make sure my vote came in? So help us through that minefield.
If you submit an application to us and we get a process and the ballot goes out in the mail, at that point, it's too late to vote a regular ballot at your polling location. What's going to happen is you're going to show up at your polling location. Our poll workers are going to say, hey, you voted an absentee. Well, we sent you an absentee. You're going to have to vote a provisional ballot at that point.
Yeah.
And that provisional ballot is that safety net for voters to say, we have 10 days on provisionals to count those, of course. And so if that voter shows up, votes provisional, we have 10 days to see if their absentee ballot arrived to us or not. If it didn't arrive, we can then go ahead and count the provisional. If the absentee ballot was returned, then we void the provisional ballot and it's null and void. But at some point, and we're going to have this issue this time because everyone's sending these applications and not knowing what they are, they think it's required.
Right.
And a lot of our calls are people saying, well, I don't want to vote absentee now. Well, you're going to have to get rid of that application with us prior to us sending ballots out, because once we send the ballot in the mail, you're going to either vote that or you're going to vote provisional.
And then once you return the ballot, there's no takebacks. That's your vote, correct?
Right. Once you drop that in the mailbox, there's no takebacks at that point, which is different if you go vote in person and vote it. You still get two more chances to void that ballot and return it and get a second ballot until you get it right.
Another person wrote, is it better to request an absentee ballot just in case, although you plan to do early voting? I'm not sure how that works, but.
No, I would say you kind of have to make up your mind how you want to do this. Do you want to vote absentee, want to vote in person, or do you want to vote on election day? You have those three options.
Right.
And at some point, the voters have to decide how they want to participate. Right. It's not, you can't do all three or even two.
All of the above.
It's efficient and smooth.
Another question we have, and this, anyone can jump on this one too. What is the difference between a poll worker and a poll watcher? Explain those processes.
I can't answer that.
You want me to jump in? I hate to jump in.
I know, yeah.
Conversation.
But Tom, you're kind of the center of attention in terms of the question, so.
Well, I guess a poll worker works for us. We hire them through the Board of Elections, and those are those four workers at each of the precincts of our 212 precincts. And we pay them for the day. We train them. They get paid. They show up at 6 in the morning. They work until the polls are closed. And they work for us that day. And we're responsible for those 850 poll workers. A poll watcher is someone that's appointed inside your precincts or to the Board of Elections that's appointed by a political party or a committee of 5 candidates. And their job is to actually, the old observers, and Kristen, maybe you participate in this program a few times. They're observers, but now they're called watchers.
Yeah, the idea was to just sort of be a poll watcher was the idea of an outside neutral party that's just there to observe for the day. But they have, theoretically, there's no jurisdictional authority of a poll watcher. Their campaigns can appoint somebody, political parties can appoint somebody, and the League of Women Voters used to participate in a whole poll watcher program where we would get lots of volunteers who would be not only at the polling sites, but also then later in the evening at the Board of Elections observing the process, similar to how the media still mills around on election night.
Mills around. Bugs people. Every time they see someone walk into the hallway, they pounce on them. Yeah.
Yes. So similarly, that's sort of like the poll workers are, the ones at the end of the day who have the jurisdiction of informing a voter of information. But watchers are welcome to, but that still all is predetermined, and you have to be registered and you have to go through the process with the Board of Elections. You can't just come out on election day and be like, oh, I'm going to be a poll watcher. So.
Yeah, a poll watcher is a volunteer, basically.
Right.
They're not getting paid.
Right.
And they're being appointed either through the local Republican or Democrat Party or the state Democrat or state Republican Party. And I believe the forms for those are due 11 days from election. So if any of your watchers or listeners want to be a poll worker, you call us here at the Board of Elections. If you want to be a poll watcher watching the election, and if there's problems, you call the Board of Elections or you call whoever appointed you. Then you call your local party or the state parties to be a poll watcher. And the other way, if you have 5 candidates, they can form a committee of 5, and they can appoint poll watchers at the same time. And basically, you're watching what's happening in the polls and observing, the old observers.
Making sure Tom and Joyce, the people watching Tom and Joyce watch Tom and Joyce. Maybe that's how it works.
Right.
I want to spend some time, and then we're going to go through some rapid fire, get caught up on questions we have from readers and from the audience tonight. But one of the questions we're getting a lot, and I'm sure you're all hearing it, something everyone can probably weigh in on, when should we plan to have results on November 3rd? What's the what is the expectation in terms of what happens when when 7:30 rolls around and we're all done voting? What happens next?
Go to bed. That's what. Go to sleep. I don't anticipate. I think everybody, Dr. Sracic could jump in, but I would anticipate some of the states may be able to provide results. But the reality on our local races, the local races will be able to do, quote unquote, their normal information that they get out to the news channels. But if anybody's asking that particularly about the presidential results, that's unequivocally not going to be on election night. You heard it here first. I don't even.
Breaking news.
There's no way.
And it kind of goes into what I mentioned a little earlier. That's just the popular vote, though, right? Because with the electoral vote, that happens a couple weeks out. That's correct, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. The electoral vote is until December.
Yeah.
But but once we determine the popular vote, then we'll know the electoral vote. But the problem's going to be, could be, right, if the election's close at all, determining who actually, has the plurality, because that's all you need in a state, to earn all of the state's electoral votes.
There you go.
And just think of electoral votes as sort of a surrogate Congress. So you look at how many people you have in Congress and how many senators you have, that's how many electoral votes you have. And it's like a one-day Congress that votes for president. The weird thing is we do it winner take all, right? So if you get one more vote than anybody else in the state of Ohio, you get all the electors for the state of Ohio. But I think Kristen's right, particularly because, we're not always going to know how many other votes are going to be counted out there, right? It's going to be hard to know that number. I guess Tom could fill this in. I don't know how many days in Ohio do you have for that absentee ballot to arrive. It has to be postmarked by November 2nd, but how many days till it arrives to be counted?
Well, that's a 10-day window that we have. It's postmarked by Monday at midnight, and there's a barcode on our mail that we can scan to figure out when it was barcoded. We can accept those 10 days out, and then you also have those provisional ballots that are sitting there that can't be touched or opened for 10 days. So in Ohio, what you see, and every state's different, you're going to see two numbers out of Ohio. You see the unofficial results on election night, and that's You see that from Mahoning County for a commissioner's race or any local race, you have the unofficial result. And then there's a certification process after that 10 days where you see the official results. And that's when you add all the provisional ballots in, the late arriving absentee ballots in. And in Ohio, you same thing. On election night, you're going to see one unofficial result, and it's unofficial. And then once all the counties, 88 counties, do their official results, and Ohio releases their official results. And correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, but Florida does a rolling count, it seems, that as ballots come in for those 10 days or 8 days, whatever their rules are, they keep adding numbers to their totals. And so it's a constant running figure, which gets confusing at times. Ohio, you have two numbers, unofficial, and at some point you're going to see the official. And we've had close races in Ohio before. You mentioned Florida in the past. I think, you heard it here first, I think we're going to have a winter election night.
Really?
One way or the other.
Remember, I mean, in 2018, for example, in Arizona, right, you had everyone thought Martha McSally won that election. And she had a pretty good lead at the end of that night. And then Christine Sinema ends up winning, when they count all of that. So I think the problem this time is to get a good handle on how big your lead has to be fairly confident, that you're going to win as all the other ballots come in, and particularly if that's the case in a number of states, that we could have a long period, and then of course you could have litigation on top of that, which could extend things out even more. Brian's right. We've got to have something by December, right? Because we got to know what electors go to the state capitol to cast their vote for president. So we don't have that much time to work this out.
Well, maybe mine is wishful thinking that we have the results on election night. Because as an election official, we always like wide margins.
Reader has a question, Tom, though. Having more early voting and more absentee ballots in your hand going into election night, does that speed up or slow down the count?
Actually, I don't think it has much effect because at 7:30 in Ohio, the first results you see that we report to the media are those early votes. That's the absentee, the early voters. And so at 7:30, you're going to see close to maybe 50, 60,000 votes in already. But the problem is whether 1,000 people vote at a polling location or one person votes, it's still the same process of getting that vote back here to the Board of Elections and downloaded.
Right.
I think you're going to know local winners and losers earlier,
right,
because you're going to have 50% of the vote in, and if someone has a substantial lead, that race is probably over at that point.
The questions are coming fast and furiously. Someone has a question. If you vote in person, are masks going to be mandatory? And if you see somebody in line who is not wearing a mask, what's the process? What happens? Do you call the Board of Health, or what happens?
Well, we've gotten some contradictory directives over the last few months on this. Right now, it's going to be mandatory. We're going to encourage every voter that comes in to wear a mask, but at some point, you cannot turn a voter away either. We can encourage them to vote what's called a curbside ballot. Go back to your car. We'll send a Republican and Democrat out to that car to vote you curbside if you don't want to have a mask. Slows the process down, though. Yeah. But if a voter insists of not wearing a mask, we're going to have to let them vote because you can't turn voters away. We're hoping voters comply, whether you like a mask or don't like a mask. It's 5-10 minutes. Most people go into stores. We'll wear that mask because the store requires it. Right. Because it's a courteous thing to do, for God's sakes. So we're hoping voters, hey, if you don't want to wear a mask, vote absentee. So it's that simple. We're banking on courtesy for the election. Oh yeah, we are. Yeah, it's Youngstown.
Well, it's a great question. I mean, the poll workers are going to be busy enough. They don't, to have them become the mask police is, probably asking a little bit too much. So hopefully, and maybe both parties can do a better job too.
Most of my election day is actually spent going out to polling locations and taking care of problems of campaign workers not following the rules within 100 feet. I think most of my election day is going to be people not wearing masks. So
Yeah.
we'll get through it.
Maybe we'll attach a reporter to your hip. That would make for a fascinating election day story. Tom out.
Well, we did that a few years ago with the Business Journal, and they showed up at 5 in the morning and stayed with me until well past midnight.
Oh my Lord.
When we had bourbon cigars that night. So you're welcome. You know, give me someone that wants to spend the whole day, and I'm in.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I mean, that has got to be the longest day for you and Joyce too. Just in terms of and
That's
for
like Christmas for election day. So come on, yeah, that's what we do. We work all year for election day, and you got to enjoy it.
quick audience question. I last voted in Ohio. I now go to school at Carnegie Mellon University. Where should I register to vote?
They can do either. If it's a student, if they wish to register at that university, they can. If they intend to return home over the summers, they can use their parents' address. We get that question a lot. It's a great question. So correct me if I'm wrong. I think, Kristen, you've dealt with this issue too. They can go either way as long as you're a student.
Yeah, and obviously you just want to seriously answer that person's questions, you just want to take into consideration if you're gonna vote absentee, make sure that absentee ballot gets sent wherever, even if you're registering your parents, but where are you gonna be where are you right now? Are you at school? Are you at home? If you're not gonna be able to drive into Mahoning County on election day, then you might wanna register at school. It's either or is the way Ohio's law kind of goes with students, because if you still live at home in the summer, you could be registered at your parents' house. You just wanna take into consideration where you're going to be maybe, the month of October and, for election day. And then if you are going to be registered in Mahoning County, make sure you get that absentee request in as soon as possible.
And then, of course,
I have 2 kids in college, and I'm going to drag them here on the weekends to make sure I see them vote.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
That's a good plan. But you also have the added sort of confusion in a pandemic. Is my college going to be open on, where will I be November 3rd? Well, where will any of us be November 3rd? I think it's probably another.
That's definitely a question.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't know. It's all at the hands of the pandemic right now. We're just along for the ride. Someone says, go ahead, Paul.
I mean, given how many students aren't on campus now,
Yeah.
or on their campuses around the country, this is actually going to potentially be a pretty big issue on election day, particularly if students were confused, they voted in 18 on campus, kind of expected to be back there, but they don't go to school in the same state, for example. And in a close election with young voters, this could be actually a really big issue on election day. It's always confusing, but even more so this year.
Yeah. And part of that is the engagement that I know Kristen and Bryant have sort of kind of gotten into. And are there any closer to home at YSU? Are there any between now and October 5th? Are there any voter registration drives, efforts, drive-throughs? Anything planned?
I believe so, and I think one of our advantages, to Dr. Sracic's point, is YSU is still traditionally known as a commuter campus,
right.
But subsequently our counterparts in Columbus and at Ohio State, Ohio State has a polling location right on campus.
Right.
So now you're looking at, what does that look like? How many students are doing a lot of remote class stuff, and so it's a very good point. We've tried to, my discussion has just been, if you've been home, if you went home over the long summer and the school was all remote, re-register yourself at your parents' house this election. You might not like to, but that's the best thing to do.
And plus, after college, you'll be moving back in anyway, chances are. So, the reader says, ask Paul Sracic if the Senate, let's go back one. If the Supreme Court has to decide this election like Bush v. Gore, what happens if it deadlocks? What happens if it gets back to the Supreme Court and and there's a deadlock? Well, where does the election go at that point?
Well, remember, the Supreme Court's never the first decision in a case. You have
Right.
to appeal to the Supreme Court from somewhere else.
Right.
So in the event of a deadlock, it's whatever the lower court decision is. It doesn't set a precedent technically, but that decision remains. So whatever happened below will be the decision and the deciding decision in the case.
What do you, if you're forecasting this, do you see this? What are potential issues we should watch for this time around in terms of things that might be contested?
Well, I think, we already saw it right out of Pennsylvania, right? With the naked ballot, it's going to be those sorts of issues that arise, the issues of counting later on. And, I think that's going to go forward with these mail-in ballots. There'll be challenges that are going to go up. Also, you're dealing with these deadlines. So one of the big questions in Florida in 2000 was how quickly do you have to get this done to make sure those electoral votes, count. So I think that the expediting of the counting and coming up with these final numbers is going to be part of this. But I think we assume all this stuff's going to go to the Supreme Court. I don't know that that's going to be the case. Florida was a weird election because of the kind of ballots that they used, and the problems of trying to decide how to count, a hanging chad, right? As we said, these little holes that weren't perforated. We're not doing that anymore, right? We don't have that. So it's not going to be the same kind of issue that came up in Bush versus Gore. To be honest with you, it's a little hard for me to figure out
what the issue is. Yeah.
What's going to be, other than the sort of normal stuff that we litigate. Somebody got purged that shouldn't, somebody didn't vote who should have. But I think in some ways we're exaggerating that potential problem. The bigger problem is going to be trying to come up with the final count if it's really close.
Well, that kind of leads to our next question, though. So one of our members of our audiences asked me to ask you, how many real cases of voter fraud do we see in the Valley on a given year? How prevalent is voter fraud out there?
I give that one to Tom, I guess. I don't.
Tom?
Yeah. Every year we might refer one or two cases down to the prosecutor's office. Sometimes it's 3 or 4. A lot of times it's mistaken identity, a father and son that have the same middle initial, that it looks like they voted twice or voted they shouldn't have. But we have very few cases of actual voter fraud. In the past, what we usually have is what's called voter registration fraud, for a better term, that people turn in voter registration cards that they don't exist. They don't live where they say they live, because groups and organizations try and get their numbers up. And if you're paying them per registration or per somebody per day, we have stacks of registrations that are basically fraudulent. There's no intent to vote those people. It's more inflating their numbers. We don't have a lot of voter fraud in Ohio. I think it's easy to vote and hard to cheat. And that's one of those phrases from our former Secretary of State, John Husted. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I think Ohio, it's a little tougher than other states. I think if you look at states with mail-in ballots, there's a potential there. There's issues where it could happen. When I talk about voter fraud, I get in arguments with people in my own party all the time. It's just not there. I don't see it.
Yeah, and I think Tom made a really important distinction that I'm not sure that all voters know about now. And there's one thing called, absentee ballots and one sort of mail-in voting. And they're different things, even though you mail in your absentee ballot. So we don't have sort of vote by mail in Ohio. And a lot of the questions I think about voter fraud and things like that are about vote by mail systems where everybody's mailed a ballot. You have much more of a check on the system when you're doing the absentee voters. So it's different in Ohio than some of the issues you're going to hear about in other states. I think Oregon, Washington, states like that, which have, real mail-in voting.
And we've continued to do some case studies, nationally with the league, and Ohio usually comes in, we have been in the top 10 states for the way we administer an election for the last few cycles. In terms of our checks and balances, the way the Board of Elections are divided between Democrat and Republican, Ohio actually does a pretty good job. if you're doing comparison to the way the process works. We would have some folks argue, you're always gonna have some folks argue it could be easier, or should be more difficult, or whatever those arguments are. But I mean, as long as I've been involved, I'm very confident in Ohio's process and system.
Yeah, and most states do it the way Ohio does it, at least with absentee voting. Only 9 states, as far as I know right now, are going to do mail-in voting. And I was just looking at what those states were. Almost none of them are swing states, right? So, maybe Nevada. I don't think we're talking about it all the time. I'm not sure it's going to be the big issue come November that maybe we think it is now.
And the last question we have is actually for Mahoning Matters. Someone wants to know when our voter's guide is going to be out, and it's going to be out this week. So we are going to have a section on mahoningmatters.com. It's broken down by the county you live in and all of the candidates and all of the issues. If you're interested in what you may face November 3rd or sooner. We're rushing to get that up by the October 5th, 6th deadline that you all have set for us. So, but if at least for Mahoning Matters, if you want to know what the issues are and who's going to be on the ballot, check with us. We'll be right there with bunting and flags. You won't be able to miss it on our website. As I warned everyone, this is a very quick session, and I do want to thank all of our guests. I want to leave everyone with one final question, give everyone a shot at this one. What's one bit of advice here that you would give people about, the value of voting and getting registered by October 5th? Kristen, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, sometimes in the big picture, democracy formed by the people have to participate. We get who we elect as a citizenry, right? Like, if we don't like things that are going on, did we vote? I can't stress how important it is to participate in our democracy by voting. It's a right that folks fought and died for. As a woman, it's a right I hadn't historically wasn't enshrined in the Constitution and in its original form. As a woman, I think that it's incredibly important to vote, and there's so many local things that touch your day-to-day life that you don't even think about that are affected by voting. Sometimes we get caught up in the presidential, and the local's just as important. So, it's a critical year. We want to see high turnout in Mahoning County, and there's no reason not to.
And thank you, Kristen, too, for joining us tonight. Yeah, we appreciate all the work the league does, and we're very lucky to have people like you who are out there on the front line. So thanks for joining us. Paul, what's your last word on getting people out there to vote?
In Florida in 2000, right, the whole presidential election was decided by about 500 votes. But afterwards, the New York Times sort of did a study. They had it online, and the question in Florida was whether to count sort of whether the hole was completely perforated or not. And you could set it up on the computer for, I'm going to count a hanging chad with 2 sides detached, 1 side detached, and then it would run it. And if you set it to one setting, what you found out is Gore won Florida by 1 vote. No. That's how close it was. So if you think about it, 1 vote could potentially decide a presidential election, and it could be yours.
And thank you too, Paul, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Tom, what's your best shot at getting people out there to vote?
Well, I think someone touched on it earlier, talking about why should young people vote, why should anyone vote? And over the years here, this is my 22nd year, you're just not voting for president this year. You're voting for Congress, commissioner, all the way down to local school issues and township issues and park issues. And we've actually flipped coins on races before here. Yeah. Where at the end of the night, end of the official count, it was tied. And we actually flip coins in Ohio or draw lots. And we've had elections decided by a coin flip. And so I think that your vote does count all the way from the top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket. And it's about participation and having a say in your community, who represents you, and the taxes you pay and what you get. I take it pretty serious because I've done this for so long, and communities that participate more active tend to get better representatives.
And Tom, thanks for all you do at the Board of Elections too, and thanks for taking. Oh, no, I know this is your busy time of the year, so I appreciate you joining us too. Brian, I'm going to give you the.
Perfect.
I'm going to give you the last word, Bryant. What's your best pitch to get people out there to take part?
I'll just say your vote does matter. You know, understand that it does matter. And I want people to understand that there have been many sacrifices that have been made by so many people in the past to ensure that we all have this equal right to voice our opinions and to make our vote known. And don't just be the popular voter, you know, be an educated voter, you know, learn both sides, you know, you don't have to go with the cliche, the ideas that you see in the media. Be very strategic as to who you want to see, who do you want to represent you and your community within this presidential election and the local elections.
That's outstanding. And thank you, Bryant. You've been with us on all of these, and we absolutely appreciate your participation. And we want to thank the audience, too, for joining us tonight. We appreciate all the comments. We tried to get to as many as we could. We do appreciate folks who wrote in advance and kind of kept us going tonight. You know, again, Community Matters is a discussion forum, and it's part of our commitment to talk about the issues that are important in the Valley, and we just can't do that without the support of the great team here at the Stambaugh Auditorium, who really makes me look like I know what I'm doing. It's great, and the Business Journal helps us out too. Our next Community Matters discussion is October 21st. We're going to tackle how do we engage Valley citizens to foster change, and we're going to invite some candidates to join us live. We're hoping it's a hybrid event at the Stambaugh, hoping many of our panelists can join us down here, and it's just great down here, and we'd love to see, in a socially distanced, responsible way, having people join us tonight. We want to thank the audience for joining us, and thank our panel for their time. Matt, Courtney, Travis, Joanne, the team down here at the Stambaugh, thank you very much. On behalf of them, the Mahoning Matters team, we wish everyone a good night, and let's be careful out there. And vote. Take care. And we're out.